What's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. On today's episode, I talk with Jessica Gardner McCoy for probably my most spirited and enthusiastic conversation I've ever had on this show. McCoy discusses how she created Head Above Water Midland, a program that she developed that includes swim lessons and water safety courses, along with her swimming career at SMU and the rough road to earning 2 degrees despite having learning disabilities, which she wholeheartedly embraces. So I really hope that you enjoy today's conversation. And as always, thank you for listening to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. So we're back with another A2A podcast episode today, sitting down with Jessica. And Jessica, it's been really fun to get to know you over the last day and kind of dig into your brain. And I can't wait for everyone else to kind of listen to all of your expertise and your experiences. And so to start off, as I said, I want to allow you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience and let them know who you are.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jessica Gardner McCoy, and yeah, I go by both last names because it just seems appropriate, I guess. I'm not sure. But, as an athlete, a former athlete myself, I also don't want to lose that last name because that's what I competed under. So Anyway, I'm Jessica. I was born in Kansas, adopted. Then about 24 hours after I was born, moved to Texas, to Houston. Grew up the first 8 years of my life in Houston, right outside of Houston, technically. So if you're a Houstonite, I feel like they're very particular about what is actually considered Houston. So Richmond, to be specific. And then at 8 years old, moved to Austin, Texas, where I grew up 8 to 18. And I consider myself an Austinite. Swam at SMU in Dallas, Southern Methodist University. And then now I'm currently living in Midland, Texas, and I own a swim school. So pretty fun, weird circle of events because I did not plan to be a swim coach at this part of my life. I thought I was going to be an attorney. So, and I always consider myself a woman of who really didn't know what to do after I graduated. I'm going to be honest with you. I've had every single job there is, and everything has always never really felt like me. Because I think you can resonate with this, Ryan, when you retire, right? It totally makes it difficult for you to understand who you are. So I've gone through that whole process and now I've made a living out of it.
Yeah.
That's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. And, the first question I have for you is, and, like I said, with getting to know you and reading your bio and everything else, swimming and being an athlete, it wasn't really a thing for you, right? You were this is something that I can do to get myself to the next level of education.
100%.
But why swimming? Why not some other sport? And did you try any other sports as a youngster?
Great question. Funny story, just to kind of start off that, is my parents did not want me to swim. I was so bad, Ryan, at swimming. I'm not kidding. So in the state of Texas, I know you lived here for a short while and you're going to move back. But the thing is when you, especially in South Texas, Central Texas, a lot of kids learn to swim from their neighborhood. Lifeguards will teach a summer league swim team. So at the age of 2 years old, all the way to about 8, you can join a summer league swim team. So my parents did that. And I was so bad that my parents were kind of please God, let's not let let's not let her actually enjoy this because it's painful for us to watch. And I'm not trying to be self-deprecating. That's actually the story. I would purposely disqualify myself in my event so that I could get the purple ribbon because purple was my favorite color. This is just 4-year-old logic, right? I'm going to be so bad in my event that I get the color ribbon that I wanted. And that honestly just encapsulates my entire swimming career. My parents joke that I am the least competitive person there is. And I would joke with my parents that I didn't really want to swim. I really just wanted to meet friends. So for me, swimming evolved from, okay, I want to get the purple ribbon, which is the disqualification ribbon, by the way. Like if you're not in the know of swimming, like they give every kid a little precipitation. No, that's raining. Participate. I can't say that word. But they give you a ribbon and they're like, oh, good job. It's so cute that you did good, right? Well, I figured it out that if I disqualified, I could get purple. Well, then it evolved into how could I meet some new friends? So I would go to swim meets and I would go hang out on, like, swim meets are typically just very kind of like churn and burn. We got one event, then the next event, Well, I can never forget this memory of me almost missing, like literally, I'm not kidding, Ryan. Like I almost missed my first race. Then in that same swim meet, about like my 7th race, almost missed it. And my thing is I would befriend the stroke judges and like the clerk of course, which are basically the people that kind of run the whole thing. And they would yell at me over the intercom being like, Jessica, get over here. You're about to swim. Because I'd be talking to like random people on the pool deck and I would forget that I was going to swim. So I would run, like my swim coach to this day has this memory of me running like, and this is like a 50-yard pool. Like this is at the University of Texas, Lee and Joe Jamel pool, where I would run from one end to the other being like, oh my God, I'm going to miss my event. So clearly my priorities were never really about the sport. It was more about meeting people and having fun. Because as you can tell, Ryan, like, I mean, we had a conversation yesterday that was supposed to be 15 minutes and it ended up being an hour. So apologies, but I can really talk to a wall. But it just evolved into this, I kind of just like doing this to get a little like a reward to, I want to meet friends. And then as I started getting really good, which was like more like middle school, where I started placing in the top like 8, top 5 in the state, I started realizing, oh my gosh, like we're starting to talk about PSATs, right? In middle school, they have you do it so that you can understand how off the mark are you? Well, I have learning disabilities, okay? I have dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. So anything that can revolve around you doing things backwards, reading backwards and doing math backwards, and I'm very oversimplifying what my actual disabilities are, but I had it, right? So my mom was like, she was a teacher and she was in administration within elementary school and her career has spanned around 35 years. She was like, hey, I want to be honest with you. I'm a teacher. We're working off a teacher's salary here. I don't know if we're going to be able to get you into the school that would really benefit you, because she knew if I were to go to a school like the University of Texas or Texas A&M, just a large school, I would just fall underneath the cracks and would not be supported enough academically. So, along with that, we probably wouldn't even been able to afford a state school, if I'm being honest with you. But she kind of said, if you want to do this, I think swimming would be a great catalyst for you. Like, let's see if we can get you a scholarship. So I kind of made it my job. So for me, it's like I compartmentalized. I've always been able to compartmentalize my sport. It was always a means to do something. So at first it was a means of getting a purple ribbon because that was my favorite color, right? Then it transitioned into, this is how I meet my friends. And then it transitioned into, this is my job. This is what is going to get me a college degree. And my family, I have one side of my family that is straight off the boat, what they say, Lithuanian. My grandparents came over from Lithuania as refugees, I guess you could say, from World War II. And they got their citizenship through the U.S. Army. My Lithuanian 6'5" grandfather could speak 5 different languages, so they put him in Alaska. So I have this mentality of, I do not have the position and the right to enjoy. Does that make sense? Like, I don't have the privilege of savoring something. I'm to this day, I have a hard time enjoying like small things because it's my job. My job is to be very utilitarian. And I don't know if that's the Lithuanian side of my family, that I was adopted into, where it's like, you have a role, you have to perform, and it's a means to an end. So yeah, I did other sports. My parents really, in efforts to see if I could not like the sport, they were pushing soccer, and I ended up getting into like the A League, which is like the select group for, I don't know, like I don't even know if that's the right terminology anymore, but like when you get into A League and soccer in Houston and like the select group, that's when you start traveling. And I know Matt Bowers was talking about in your last, the last episode. That's 100% a plug. So Matt Bowers is the director of my grad school program. So I'm just going to like shoot that out there. It's a little promo. But, he brings up a really good point. Like I don't know if this is just Texas too. Cause like Texas, I know with the hockey leagues in the East Coast, it's that's pretty popular, right? Like you ship your kid into a select team, they kind of travel and there's lots of camps and stuff. So we did that and I ended up being really successful doing soccer. And we had that conversation much like that. I don't think that this is anywhere out of the normal. When you have a very athletic kid, at some point you have to sit down and say, hey, what sport are we going to do? Unless you're Kyler Murray, right? Where he did like baseball and football, which like to this day, I like blows my mind that like, didn't he play baseball until senior year? And then
there's been a good amount of athletes that have played both, even in college.
Incredible.
Jameis Winston, who was a quarterback at Florida State, he was both a pitcher for the baseball team and the quarterback who won the Heisman, right? So there's a number of athletes that don't ever really have to choose until it gets to a certain point. And if you're Deion Sanders or Bo Jackson, you actually never do because you play professionally with both of those sports, with both baseball and football. So
it's just like, extend that eligibility out, the 5+1, you know what I mean? Like once you stop being eligible. Oh wait, who was that guy who was like 35? Like he played sports for his 4 years. He played, baseball in his undergrad. And then when he was like, he came back to do his graduate degree and then played football. Do you remember that? It was a while back.
And probably another Florida State quarterback, Chris Winkie, who was like 27, I think, as a freshman or something like that. Yeah.
I mean, go back and
baseball first.
The university's going to pay for it. I mean,
he played professional baseball first and then came back to college. So
really? Oh man, that just blows my mind. Like, and then, another sport that I did was I jumped horses, which I loved. Like that was the first time where I really felt like I loved what I was doing athletically. And I feel like, I know your background, right? Like you're a wrestler and you played football, right? Like sometimes a sport can inform the other. So like for swimming, I have incredible leg strength, right? So I was jumping these 4 and 5 foot fences and I loved it, but it's such an expensive sport. So my parents were like, listen, we're already really pushing it with swimming, because I was swimming for Texas Longhorn Aquatics, which is one of the best, and to this day, I think they're still pretty great programs in the state of Texas. And so we were paying like a premium just for swimming. And then you add in like the horse stuff, like that's a whole other thing. But honestly, like the more sports I played, the more I realized just how much of a kinesthetic learner I am, and I think that there's so much brain activity, right? Like if I'm really big on neurology, like I'm such a nerd in regards to like, and I don't say that as like, in a pick me girl type, phrase in the sense of like, yeah, I'm such a nerd, but no, legit. I am like, I will sit there and read stuff for hours because it's fascinating to me how the brain works, right? Like if you're able to, for instance, when you have a kid, right? Like I have two. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So I'm in the thick of parenting. And what I've learned is that if you are teaching children 2 different languages at the same time, the neuroplasticity of them being able to understand and actually learn other languages expands tremendously. So I can only assume, and again, I'm just curious to see if I'm assuming that would be the same for sports. Once you start learning one sport and you start understanding the orientations of your body movements, and how it moves, I would understand that it would probably be easier for us to pick up other sports. So, that's kind of my whole story in regards to how I started with swimming and the other sports I tried. But honestly, like, I just think it's the funniest thing that, like, I mean, I was so bad that like my parents were consistently setting me up with swim lessons. And I've had swim lessons from like literally, I think like 20 swim coaches, because my parents were like, she's just not getting it. Like there's some movements that I was struggling with. And what I'm learning is that people who, I have ADHD too, which if you haven't, figured that out yet, from how my conversations go, but I only bring that to disclose that because what I'm learning is that people who have dyslexia tend to be a top-down thinker. Like, so if you can't give me the big picture, it's hard for me to grasp the steps to get to the big picture. So when a coach would explain something to me about moving my body in a certain way, I didn't quite understand it. And people who have ADHD have a hard time with their working memory. So if someone were to tell me something like, hey, Jessica, I want you to move your body in a certain way, my brain does not absorb that and put it immediately back into long-term memory. So I found that very difficult. And what was really funny is my strokes would change every 5 or 10 strokes. So it was very difficult for me to really nail down my stroke technique growing up. So anyway, I just think it's fascinating how kids can just play different sports because my brain just doesn't work like that. I mean, I had a hard time with soccer for a while until I did pick it up. And, muscle memory work is an incredible thing. So anyway, I know you did football and wrestling.
Football and wrestling, and they go pretty much hand in hand. There's a lot of NFL players that were wrestlers, mostly very large linemen. There's only a couple guys that are the speedy types or the defensive back types, but a lot of the really large linemen were wrestlers. And, there's probably going to be even more. I actually just met a kid he's going to be going to Iowa that is going to be playing both football and wrestling. I don't know if he's going to be able to balance it. I wished him all the best. He's like the top recruit in the country. So we'll see if he can honestly balance it on the college level. But yeah, I did both. And, growing up until I got to college, and then it was all football. And, and I can just I can remember, and that kind of takes me right into my next question. I can remember recruiting wise, right? I can remember getting letters for both, and having a letter from Columbia come for wrestling, and then having Division II, Division III offers come for football, right? So I ultimately chose football in the Division III level, but for somebody who was basically trying to grasp their sport growing up, right, trying to get muscle memory and everything else, along with just trying to get to that next level academically, because that's ultimately what swimming was for you. It was a means to get the eventual 2 degrees that you ended up leaving SMU with. But what was that recruiting process like for somebody who did get recruited by a number of schools? What was that recruiting process like, and how did you keep everything straight and compartmentalized as you went through that process?
That's a great question. So for me, the whole recruiting process for me was like the blind leading the blind. Okay. So my parents had never played sports in college. One of them really did want to, but she had a lower back injury because of a car accident, and some knee issues. So was never able to really that never came into fruition for her. So, what was really difficult for me is I kind of felt like I had my hands tied behind my back because my parents didn't have the resources, which is not their fault, right? I love them to death. But they had their hands tied back behind their backs because they had never done it before. So it's not like they could lead me and be like, this is what we do, right? Or this is the next step. So what actually started my recruitment process was I started noticing, because I can't remember, freshman year, you can start getting those info packets sent to you. And I started noticing that it was kind of a flex at the UT Swim Center. That's where my club team would practice, where you would get mail from universities, and that you could, which was kind of crazy to me, that you could have your recruiting stuff sent to the place that you practiced. I noticed that, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. So because when you have learning disabilities, I have been able to pick up on stuff that I don't think people think about, because their brain is just they think in a certain way. And I think most people think in a certain way, right? To them, they're like, oh, cool, that's mail. For me, I was thinking, how are they getting that mail? So what I did is I started being nosy and looking at okay, that girl got this letter, that person got that letter. And then I literally just emailed, and I started saying, like, every single time I'd see a university come by, and drop their like letter in the mail or whatever, I would look up that university and like read about that university. And then I would send an email, because they can't ever respond back to you as a freshman. But what they can do is they can respond back by sending a media packet. So I continued these, like this type of communication all the way up into senior year. And then I started looking at, like, my mom was an educator, right? So like she was saying, like, you're probably going to need a smaller school. But inside my head, being from Texas and swimming at Texas, I was like, I have to go to a big school, because I think when you are a student athlete at some point in high school, and maybe not everybody's like this, but I would probably say there is a big group of people that are like, the bigger the glory, the better, like, you know, the better the hype, right? Like, people are going to be so excited for me if I sign with a big school. Like, because that's baller, right? Like, I'm looking to have the biggest flex on my teammates, right? And honestly, that's what it was with swimming, is what school. Like, the bigger the school, the fancier the school. Awesome. So I started looking at, weirdly, Columbia and Yale, Dartmouth, you know, Purdue, Vanderbilt, SMU, Rice, Texas, Texas A&M. Those were like my big schools that I was looking at. And, you know, as my high school career kind of took off, like, I made the national age group record relay. I was on a relay that we made, you know, we were the best in the nation in 3 relays, which was so cool. When that event actually happened and I started, like, you know, we got that accolade, I started placing top 16 in the nation. And I think that my total event count was like 12 events that I did that placed top 16. And I would consecutively do that. And then in the state, I was placing in the top 8, top 4, that kind of thing. But I was never like number 1, like, ever. So like, I kind of like was observing. I was kind of in like this really cool seat, I guess you could say, of being able to observe what everyone above me was doing. And then I would take that into consideration and then kind of like send out, I wasn't afraid to like contact people, because in my opinion, what could happen? Because
worst they can say is no, right?
Yeah. And like, in my learning disabilities, I have failed more, like, because of how my brain is, than been successful. So for me, like, I kind of come from the perspective of like, I have nothing to lose, because 9 times out of 10, I typically do get a no or a fail, like, whatever, because it's difficult for me. I learn differently. And when you go to public school, like, that you're told to like think a certain way or like study a certain way, and that never worked for me. So it was always feeling like I was going like this against like everything in my life. So I had nothing to lose, so I put myself out there. Now, luckily, Eddie Reese, who's like the most decorated men's swimming coach, he was the University of Texas men's coach for, oh my gosh, so many years. You know, he pulled me aside and was like, hey, look, I think that you should really think about SMU and Rice, because you want to stay in town, like, you want to stay in Texas. You know, you have these learning disabilities. I think that this would be a really good fit for you. And I'm like, cool. Like, also super intimidated, because, you know, I'm thinking Rice, like, Rice is, I mean, like, incredible academics. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do with that. But, you know, I mean, seriously, like, I think I really am so thankful for the self-awareness that my parents gave me in regards to myself academically. Like, I kind of knew what I could handle, but like, there was a lot of naivete for sure. But, you know, he kind of put the bug in my ear, and then weirdly enough, they started showing up at our swim meets, and it kind of took off from there. And I took a recruiting trip to Purdue. I was offered a full ride at Purdue, offered a full ride at Vanderbilt. And I think that this is a lot of people's story. Like, I was offered a, $500 book scholarship to go to Texas, and like A&M the same way, because bigger schools like to pad their, you know, roster. But like, if I'm being honest with you, I was not good enough to have been able to compete yearly for Texas and Texas A&M, because they have some of the most incredible swimmers. One of my friend, Camille Adams, went to the Olympics. She owns a swim school, she has multiple, in Houston. And like, she was swimming at Texas A&M. So I'm like, well, she was in the same recruiting class as me. So I was like, there's no way I can compete. And my friend Samantha Tucker, who is Justin Tucker, who's like one of the best kickers, is the best kicker in the NFL. You know, she swam with me growing up. Like, and I was always looking to her being like, she's incredible. And she was in the same recruiting class as me. And, you know, went to Texas, obviously, because huge Longhorn family. Funny enough, her dad is a cardiologist, and he is one of the most incredible people I've ever met. But he gave us some tips too, because he had just gone through all that recruiting with Justin. So yeah. I hate name dropping, but like, I think it's important to know, like, you know, I know what it feels like, and I'm trying to paint the picture of like, I know what it feels like to not be the number one recruit and seeing all of these incredible people around you being like, where do I fit in? You know? And like, you know, there's nothing more that bothers me than like name dropping, but it's so important for high school students to realize like there is a place for you, regardless of your ability or like where you rank. And I think like we kind of pigeonhole ourselves as athletes in saying, well, I fit in here because I only placed X, Y, and Z in my age group. So therefore I am not qualified or good enough in our head to go to, you know, a fancy school. And in my opinion, I think that was kind of like what made me successful, because I didn't go in with that mindset. I was like, whatever, like I'm not the best, so I could care less, because I also never really was competitive enough mentally to say I have to be number one. And I would like look around at my friends, and like they were kind of like, maybe you can get this too, because I feel like wrestling's a very mental sport too.
Very much.
Like I would always look at my teammates or like my people in my race, and they would be like, oh, like, you know, like super like, don't talk to me before my race. And this is the same girl who was like racing down the side of the pool because I thought I was going to miss my race. And luckily I would have the stroke judges hold the race for me so that I could actually swim, which I'm very grateful for. It's quite entitled of me, I guess, like looking back, like that I would think that, but literally I had no idea that I was missing my race. Just oblivious. But I think that's a great way to like kind of view me as like a high school recruit, is I was 100% oblivious, but I had nothing to lose. So like when you throw spaghetti at the wall, something's going to stick, you know, like, and I encourage people, like, don't be afraid to like make yourself look like, you shouldn't be concerned about what you look like. What matters and what I think gives people the most respect for you is you acknowledge, hey man, I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm interested. And if I'm here to listen and I'm here to learn more. And that's what I did. And luckily I just had some really great people that were willing to kind of push me along, I guess. I don't know. So
yeah.
What was your recruiting process like?
Mine was actually kind of simple, honestly. It wasn't too crazy. I kind of lost passion for wrestling when I was a senior. And, you know, I was just like tired of making weight, and, you know, my body was just like, I just couldn't do it. Right. So that's why football won out. And, you know, I had seen a couple of Division III schools. Once I figured out that football was going to be, you know, my thing, you kind of come to terms with the fact that and I shouldn't say this, but because there's a couple of guys that ended up going from Division III to the NFL, or going, you know, not even playing football in college and going to the NFL. But you kind of come to terms with the fact, like, it's not really in the cards for me to be an NFL football player, right? Like, it's not in the cards for me to be a professional athlete. So once you kind of make that, you know, recognition with yourself, and you come to terms with that, it makes things a lot easier. And you just kind of do what's familiar, you know. And, you know, I am the youngest of four, and my brother, who's the closest in age to me, he also went to the same school for the same coach. You know, we're 8.5 years apart, but I was already, you know, when he's in college, I'm in junior high, and I'm going to these football games. I'm on this campus. I'm around the head coach who ended up becoming my head coach. So for me, that recruiting process was different, because I knew kind of where I fell on the athletic spectrum. I was really good in high school. You know what I mean? I was in the newspaper and I was being talked about and everything else, but it didn't ever transition to me being like the biggest, brightest star.
Yeah.
And as much as I wanted to be, it just didn't really happen. Right. So then, I end up choosing a Division III school and playing sports and, not really knowing what I wanted to even do. I graduated high school as a 17-year-old. So, I couldn't even sign the contract myself. My mom had to stay with me on campus to sign the contract because I wasn't even an adult yet. Right. So I didn't really even know what I wanted to do. I turned 18 as a freshman in October of my freshman year. And, it kind of went from there. Right. So, and I can just remember getting to campus. And this is actually a question I want to ask you is I can remember getting to campus and not fully understanding what the academic life was like. And, we had already talked about how we both have degrees in English. You have 2 degrees. I have a degree in English. Yours is also in sociology as well as English, right? Right. Like we know that whole English grind, but I didn't get into English until the back half of my sophomore year. I changed my major 3 times. Did you know what you wanted to do going into college? And with and just from your reaction, I'm guessing that you were in the same boat as me, but you had, like you said, you had dyslexia, but you have a degree in English literature, right? Yes. And we know how rigorous that reading and writing path is with that. How did you eventually choose that academic path for yourself once you got to SMU?
So I'm laughing because I had so many, I just feel like my story is just when like looking back on it, I'm like, my poor parents, like I now know why they have gray hair. So I'm an only kid adopted, right? Like they've been kind, but very gentle, but I still have this like Ruffarian like idea of, hey, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? Okay. So not to like completely tear SMU down, but okay. So when you have dyslexia, or any learning disability that really impacts your academic development, you have to have an IEP if you're in public school, which is basically something that helps. I think I'm using the terminology correctly. I don't know if that's what they still call it, but basically it's accommodations, and it's granted by federal law that you have to have accommodations if you need them, right? Like the parent has to go in and say, this is what we want. And that it's a whole other conversation. I think parents are very ill-equipped to advocate for their children. Sometimes they want to. Matt Bowers talks about in your last podcast, like parents have the best intentions, but we just don't have the resources. And that's something that I'm really passionate about. But anyway, my mom being a teacher, she knew how to go about this. So anyway, you have to have all of these tests done that basically confirm that you have a learning disability. And I was diagnosed in 2nd grade. Well, anyway, SMU lost all my disability paperwork. I mean, all of it. Yeah. So guess who had no accommodations? And like, I'm severely dyslexic. Like you see it in my dyscalculia, I think is worse than my dyslexia. My mother being an educator, like really, really worked. I have to give her credit. Like the reason why I was able to get my English degree was because she really, really worked hard on teaching me. And she basically took on the role as a special education teacher for me so that I could not only get ahead, but really ahead in my English. So I've always been, and I actually took the AP English like test my sophomore year of high school. You're supposed to take it junior year. So I was already taking college credit English classes my senior year of high school. So I was kind of already ahead. Well, anyway, SMU lost all my disability paperwork. Then they made me retake all of my disability tests, which took forever. Like that process can, if you are really paying someone that has a lot of experience, you can get it done in 6 weeks, but it took forever. Well, anyway, so I almost failed out of college my first semester because I was taking all these science classes because in my head, I thought I only could be successful if I was in a STEM degree. So like science, technology, engineering, math, because I had people in my life, like I was dating a boy who was going to be an engineer. And he was like, liberal arts degrees, they mean nothing, like whatever. So in my head, being a very like insecure 17, 18-year-old girl, I was taking pre-med classes. somebody who has like 3 learning disabilities without accommodations is going to fail out of college with like without support. Okay. So, that was not good. So I was on academic probation because of that for the first semester of my college career. And I had to go work out and do all of the workouts that my teammates were doing at the rec center for like, so I had this huge, like, it was probably depression at the time, but like, I was so depressed because I was like, I know I can do the work, but I'm failing because I don't, this is something that's outside my control. And, there's so much pressure that I think student athletes put on themselves, and then they get to school and then something like that happens. And that's not something that you can control. Right. And what's really annoying, and I'm so glad, Reid and I were talking about this. We have a professor I'm at University of Texas right now, getting my master's of education in kinesiology with a specialization in sports management. And I was talking with Reid about a professor that we have in common. His name's Dr. O. And I talked to Dr. O and I'm like, hey man, like, I don't have my disability paperwork, because get this, Ryan, every school does not have to hold onto your disability paperwork. Once they retest you in college, they destroy it after 7 years. So SMU, they felt bad that they lost all my stuff. So they paid for me to get retested and do all the things to get all of the paperwork again. And then they destroyed it 7 years after I graduated, but did not tell me that they were going to destroy it. So now I'm in grad
because that's something that you would probably like to have.
Yeah. And like, I don't think I'm not saying that they're bad, or like, I think that this is very prevalent. And what I learned with Dr. O is like, oh yeah, that happens like everywhere. So for me, it's like, now I have to disclose. And by the way, I don't have to disclose my disabilities to anybody. I'm protected under the American Disabilities Act, right? So for me, I'm very open about it, because I would be curious to see, Ryan, how many student athletes do have disabilities, because there are a lot of kids who do have disabilities. Maybe they're not, maybe they've never been tested because their parent wasn't sure how to advocate for them, or maybe their school system didn't have the right resources, whatever, right? But I would be curious to see how many student athletes are, misdiagnosed or not diagnosed due to resources or parental resources or support. But like, somehow I ended up, and I honestly credit some of my favorite professors, one of which is Dr. Levy at SMU. He was one of my favorite English professors. He advocated for me so hard, because he had to go up to administration being like, this kid is great at English. She has disabilities. You have to give her a chance to get her disability stuff redone. And then Dr. Kunovich, she is now on I think she's one of, she just recently got promoted, and she's probably going to kill me because I can't remember it. But she was the director of the sociology department. And I have a BA in English literature and a BA in sociology. And if it weren't for her and Dr. Levy, along with one of my other favorite professors, Dr. Tan, who was a sociology professor, if I didn't have those 3 professors really kind of cheer for me, I don't know if I would have graduated college, because they really advocated for me, saying this girl is not going to, progress through our school if we don't get her the accommodations that she needs. And my head coach, Steve Collins, and Dominique, my assistant coach, were also very integral in like really saying, hey guys, SMU, like, you really got to tighten up here and like help her. So, obviously it was a mistake, and I don't think that it was malicious that they lost my stuff, but because they were moving offices at the time, and they lost some other people's paperwork too. So they did their best to, kind of make it right. But it's literally by the grace of God that I graduated college, because if I didn't have those professors and my head coach advocating for me, I don't think I would have be where I am today. But this is something that I think not a lot of people think about. So
and ultimately, and we kind of talked about it in the intro of, you had a ton of jobs after college. You were trying to really navigate, figure out what it was you were going to do. But you ultimately are now, a swim coach, and it's your own company that you are, running. But as I read on your website, this company started when you were in high school. So it's not even something that, just kind of came about after you got out of college. You've been doing this for a very long time, just never really put all of the effort into it to make it into what it is now. So that's what I want to kind of dig into. How did you go from, I'm going to this job and this job and this job, but I'm going to circle back around and become the swim coach that I never thought I would be?
Yeah, so I started this company when I was 16 or 15, 16, and it's mostly because my parents were like, we can't afford ACL tickets. And I was like, hey, I have a skill. I know how to swim. I bet, sorry for my dogs, I bet I can. So if it's not one thing, somehow something in my life is loud back behind me. It's not my children, it's my dogs. But like my parents were like, no way in heck are we going to spend $500 on ACL tickets. And this is back in like 2007, like not even 2020. You know what I mean? It's 2007.
And I mean, now Austin City Limits tickets are nowhere close to $500.
I can't imagine.
So much more expensive.
These were 3-day passes for $500. I think that's my friends are going to roast me. Maybe that's what it was, but I remember to me, it was like a lot of money. So at the time, like we were doing summer league swim coaching, because you could be like a junior USA swim coach, and like you can start as early as like 13 and like go through all the USA swimming training to be a junior swim coach. So I was already coaching on a summer league capacity. But then I thought, what if I do my own thing? And what was funny is there's like a very fine line from what UIL will allow you to do. So like I had to make sure that I was like riding within those eligibility requirements to make sure that I wasn't violating UIL, because UIL won't let you, which is like for Texas, that's like the national, like the state governing body for amateur sports in high school. So like you can't, like back then you could coach, but you had to have like a sponsor. So what I did is I had the head coach of our summer league swim team kind of sponsor me and be an oversight so that I could start swim lessons doing it on the side. So that's what I did. And it worked great and I loved it, but I never really saw it as a career. I was just like, that's such a sellout, like, I don't know if you feel this way, but like there's a big population of athletes that are like, if I come back to this sport as a coach, oh my God, like, I don't want to do that. Like, I want to be able to make it on my own, but literally it's like a vortex. It sucks you back in because you know it, right? And I never really felt like negative about it. I was just more like, I don't know, I want to see the world a little bit before I settle down. So weirdly enough, I ended up after college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I was thinking about going to law school, and that didn't work out because I was just like, that's too much money. But then I was nannying for a senior pastor in Dallas, Paul Rasmussen, who's still the senior pastor at Highland Park United Methodist Church. And mind you, I grew up religious, but like not very religious. And he's like, why don't you apply to be a middle school girls pastor? And I'm like, okay. And I remember looking at the salary being like, dang, that is so much money. 75% of my salary, Ryan, went to my rent because I was living in Highland Park. Like, and I had maybe $100 grocery budget. Like, it's funny when you're in college, you think like something's a lot of money, and then you realize, oh my God, all this is going towards my rent. Like, anyway, that job, Highland Park United Methodist Church, changed my life because I started to look around and say, look at all these professionals. They seem really connected to what they want to do. I want that. Like, they love their career. And inside of me, I was like, I really want to do swimming. But anyway, long story short, ended up moving out to Midland, where my husband was born and raised. He is a petroleum engineer here in Midland now. And basically, I went to an SMU football game, and I just had my newborn son. And I was talking with my mom, and I was sitting there after a Letterman's board meeting. We had a meeting before the game, and then We went to the game, and I had my little boy who was like, I think like 6 weeks old. And I was like, why am I not coaching? Like, I love this. I don't know. Like some of the guys on the board played in the 80s, back when SMU was really big. And they said, you really do need to coach. And so then I created the business as, a way of saying, well, I'm not really going to want to pay somebody to teach my kid what I know to do. So that's how it all started. And then through word of mouth, it just grew. And now I'm so thankful for this community. It's a small community, and I don't know if I could have this level of success without living here in Midland, Texas, because the people here are just ride or die for people that really care about this community, which I do. I love Midland. So that's kind of how it all ended. But it's funny that I've never really seen my sport as something that isn't other than something that helps me get to where I want to be in life. Like, I created this business 2.0, Head Above Water Midland. It's always been called Head Above Water. But Midland came in when I was like, I'm not going to pay somebody to teach my kid to swim when I know how to do it. So yeah, I don't know. It worked out great so far.
Sounds like it. It sounds like everything has, like I said, come full circle. It was something that you started literally just to go to ACL, and now it's having such a huge impact on the community that you live in, right? Which is always what you want. You always want to be able to have an impact on your hometown, or at least, wherever you settle. So, that's always a really big deal. But now I want to get to our 5 questions portion.
Yes.
And like I said, it's not so much rapid fire. It's not one word answer, but it's a little quick, right? So first question to you is, what is a swim meet that you will always remember?
Fort Lauderdale, 2000, I think it was 2008, I think. There's zone championships, and you basically top 10 people in your state get selected to go compete against the whole nation in a zones championship. And I was seated like number 2 for that race. It was I think 200 backstroke, and I got disqualified because I did a discontinuous turn, which means when you're turning, you're supposed to keep your hand moving. You can't just pull down and then sit there. You have to keep moving. And I got disqualified, and that was the highest ranking meet with the highest stakes for me, because there were college coaches there, and I got disqualified, and it crushed me. For somebody who's not competitive, to finally hype myself up enough to be competitive in that moment, it killed me. So I think that was the hardest thing for me. But honestly, it's one of my favorite memories, because that's when I felt the most supported by my teammates, because everyone came over and was like, it happens to the best of us. So it was the first time I really felt like it's okay to fail, because you learn something from it. So
yeah. What was it that kind of solidified for you that Head Above Water Midland was a success? Was it the word of mouth response? Was it, maybe the first class that you had once you solidified it? But what was it that, that light bulb moment, right? Where it was just like, I'm doing the right thing.
That's a great question. I think when I have parents come to me, so my biggest strengths as a coach is fixing what other swim instructors have done to kids. If you don't teach with the idea of mental and emotional wellness and take that into consideration with child development, you can really scare a kid in swim lessons. So I fix kids' anxiety. I attempt to, at least. And then I work with a lot of special abilities kids. I have a lot of children who have physical, developmental, emotional disabilities. And then I also work with my pre-competitive kids. And I think there was one time my friend Kristen and I was pregnant, she was pregnant, and her daughter was so scared to swim. She had really bad anxiety around swimming, and she finally swam across the pool, and both her and her mom, we both look over at each other, and her little girl said, "That made me so proud, because I just swam across the pool." And both her mom and I are crying, hormonal, ugly cry, that Kim Kardashian ugly cry. It was so, in hindsight, it's hilarious to think about. But like, it's those little moments that I hear from kids that either struggled because of a past experience in swim lessons that just did not work out, or it's my children who are, really struggling with a developmental, I call them abilities because I don't believe in labeling children like I was labeled growing up. But it's when they come to me and they say, that made me so proud of me. Because it doesn't matter what I think as their coach. I want my kids, my students, to say, I'm proud of myself. Because it's not about pleasing others. It's about being proud of yourself and doing something that is hard. Swimming is hard. So it's those little moments that every day, and literally they happen all day long. But when I had that moment with my friend Kristen, that happened like right when I started the business. It really opened my heart. Like, it is the honor of my life to help families get their kids swimming, because it's a sport that can save your life. So I don't know, that it's those little moments that mean the most.
Yeah. English question. Favorite author, favorite book?
Favorite book? Man, I got a lot of them.
Maybe something that you studied.
Yeah, I'm looking at I have like all these books right here. I would say one of my favorite books is Keith Richards' memoir. It's called Life. It's right there. The fact that guy lived as long as he has blows my mind. I also really loved, I like memoirs. I love Laura Bush's. I really loved Lucy Worsley. She's a English historian. She just wrote a book about Queen Victoria. I'm a huge UK history buff. But she just recently wrote a book about Queen Victoria and her life, and it's like 285 Days with Queen Victoria. That's a great book. But it's just fascinating to me to kind of hear about other people's story, and it kind of validates my own life of like, oh, I'm not the only one who struggled in my life. So I love memoirs, but those are some of my favorites. And there's another one that I really love. I love Walden, and I really love James McPherson. There's one that my husband just gave me a couple years ago. It's called The War That Forged a Nation. It's about the Civil War. And my husband's a big history buff too. So anything history related or memoir related, I love. What about you? What's your favorite kind of book?
I always loved like really old literature. So like I loved studying like the Divine Comedy or Canterbury Tales, stuff like that. I always loved like studying Robert Frost. I mean, my senior project, I had to merge literature and journalism because I have my minor is journalism and PR. So my entire thing was based on plagiarism and like journalistic fabrication and like academic plagiarism. So like I like merged the two. So that was like probably my favorite project that I ever got a chance to do. But like studying like the old literature, like I said, like Divine Comedy and Canterbury Tales and stuff like that was always really cool for me.
That's awesome. That was a hard one to get through, Canterbury Tales, because it's all Old English.
Yeah. My professor read it to us in Old English, and like it was crazy. Really, really hard. It was insanely hard. Next question for you is, as a swimmer, and you even said like it was a means to an end, but obviously with somebody who is as driven and works as hard as you are, you're looking at, all the swimmers around you, right? And even people that are in the Olympics, whatever else. Who is somebody that you looked up to, that you always kind of wanted to maybe not emulate, but like who is somebody that you looked up to as a swimmer?
Kelsey Ditto. And she was just the coolest growing up. She still is. She was one of those unicorns where like she was good at school and good at swimming, and her parents were just some of the kindest people. They still are. I'm just like, I haven't talked to her in forever, but she ended up going to Stanford, and she was just so down to earth. I always thought that was so cool. Like she was always placing like top 5 in the entire like country. I think that's at least my perception of what she did. She was incredible. And then another, and she was hilarious to me. And then another swimmer that I loved was, her name's Spindrift Beck. It's the coolest name ever. but she is probably one of the funniest people I've ever met my entire life. And she was the best swimmer growing up. I remember looking at her being like, I wish I could be that fast and funny. But she's incredible. She writes like she's a screenwriter, and she's worked on NCIS and a bunch of different like shows. And she's just so thoughtful in what she writes and how she conducts herself. And I've just looked up to her. I've known her since I was like 8 years old, and I've just looked up to her forever. So Kelsey and Spindrift, we call her Spin.
Cool. Awesome. So last question, and I told you about this one yesterday, is just a piece of advice, something that either you learned or that somebody told you, or you experienced it. But what's a piece of advice that you would pass on to anyone listening?
So for me, it comes from my mom. She always says that be the best at whatever you do. So like she would always say, like, if you want to grow up and be a trash collector, you have to be the best trash collector there is, right? Like basically what that means is I don't care what you do with your life, as long as you get enjoyment from it and you do it to the best of your ability, then that defines success. And I think sometimes when especially athletes, we want to please everybody because we want to make sure we're doing well and being competitive. But I think sometimes that parental structure of like your parents like cheering you on, you don't want to let them down. So she was always telling me, like, as long as you do your best and you do whatever you enjoy, you have to be the best at it. Because I think if you really enjoy what you love, it's very easy to work every day. I mean, it's a Saturday and I'm working. Like, you know what I mean? Like talking about swimming. So I don't know. I just think that that's important. It takes the pressure off the need to be successful.
So I really appreciated this conversation. It was great. Like you said, yesterday we had a chance to talk, and obviously it was a really fun conversation. It went on for an hour, even though it was supposed to be 15 minutes. And I'm sure we could probably talk for another like 2 to 3 hours about so many different things. But I am going to let you kind of get to the rest of your day. I know you said your parents took the kids, so you kind of have a childless morning, or you can enjoy your coffee and kind of hang out. So I'm going to let you get to the rest of your day. But before you go, I kind of want you to kind of let everybody know where they can find Head Above Water, and, what the website is, social media handles. And I know you also said you had a code that you wanted to share with everyone so they could get some free info.
Yeah. So something I'm passionate about now that I'm only a one-man show here when I'm an instructor, so there's only so many people I can help out on the day-to-day basis in regards to physically teaching swim lessons. But in my opinion, I am really big on advocating for parents understanding how to keep their children safe. Again, resources. If parents had more resources, I think this world would be a safer place. So I created these water safety materials that I'm offering all of your listeners for free. Using the code SAFETY, go on to my website, www.headabovewatermidland.com. You can get a free water safety coloring book that I made. It's really cool. It's digital. You can color on it on an iPad, or you can print it out indefinitely. Comes in a PDF. And then there's a water safety ebook for parents to read through and kind of educate yourself on how to keep your children safe and reduce drownings in your area. But I think it's really important to just, as athletes, having the insight that we do have about our sport, just being really real about what it's like to be a college athlete, and then whatever you can do in whatever capacity you can, giving back to your community is the most important. And this is something I hope that I can do on a larger scale. So you can find us on my website is, like I said earlier, headabovewatermidland.com. And then for other free water safety resources and tips, you can find us. I do a lot of Instagram and TikTok. So anyway, I really appreciate the time, Ryan. And I hope you have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks for having me. Yeah,
thank you. I appreciate you joining me today. Hopefully we have a chance to probably do this again. Like I said, there's so many more things that we could probably dig into and discuss, and probably more of like sport management things. Maybe we can get you back on here and discuss some of those, because I'm sure we both have some pretty similar philosophies and things that we can discuss there. But I really appreciate it. This has been a really fun conversation, and I'm going to let you get to the rest of your day.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Athletes to Athletes podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation. To engage with everything the A2A platform has to offer, go to the App Store and search Athletes to Athletes to download our new app. You can check out our educational material, and you'll ensure that you don't miss when a new episode of the A2A podcast drops. Again, thank you for listening. We'll see you again next time.